So this is the last of the organs that we're going to talk about on PowerPoint slideshow number 2. This is the large intestine, and then we will move into the accessory organs. In this slideshow, we're going to talk about large intestine anatomy and physiology. So let me start you out in your course pack if you're following me there. We're going to be on the bottom of page 90 with the large intestine, sometimes known as the colon. So this organ is the last organ that food will travel through on its way through the digestive system. The large intestine is 5 feet long, which is longer, or rather shorter than the small intestine, but the diameter here is larger than the small intestine. And these measurements of length are actually taken in cadavers who have no muscle tone. You'll notice in this picture a couple of features that are unique to the large intestine, seen nowhere else in the digestive tract. A band here called the Taenia coli. This band is like an elastic band, kind of like what you would have on underwear, that holds together the large intestine. It's actually longitudinal muscle from that muscularis externa layer here that you can see. Okay, so that's called Taenia coli. And in fact, it creates puckers on the large intestine, and these puckers here are called haustra. There are also little globs of fat on the outside surface. There they are down here. They're called epiploic appendages. What a fancy name for fat globs. So let's talk about the 3 main regions. We're going to start over here on the right side of the colon or large intestine. This first region over here is called the cecum. And what you can't see from this view is a connection between large and small intestine called the ileocecal sphincter. It would be on the back side around right there. All right, and we're going to travel up. We're going to come from the cecum up to the colon. We are now going to encounter the ascending colon. There's going to be a turn here. The liver sits here, so we call this the hepatic flexure. We come across through the transverse colon this way, and we make another turn over here. This one is called the splenic flexure because, of course, the spleen sits in that neighborhood. We travel down to the descending colon. We make an S-shaped curve here, which is actually not labeled on this image. This S-shaped curve is called the sigmoid colon. And then finally, it straightens out down here at the bottom, and that's called the rectum. Before we leave this slide, I would like to mention an appendage called the appendix, which hangs off the cecum. It's what they call a blind pouch. It doesn't go anywhere, and we think it's part of the MALT system of the lymphatic system that helps to fight bacteria before it gets into the bloodstream or the lymphatic system. All right, so let's go over to page 91. The rectum is straight. It opens up into the terminal portion of the large intestine that's called the anal canal. The opening is called the anus. The anal canal actually is stratified squamous epithelial tissue, and of course the anus has 2 sphincters, an internal sphincter and an external sphincter. These sphincters are going to help regulate the passage of feces from the digestive system. So we'll talk more about the anus and the processes of defecation as we get to this in just a few moments. Notice this is the lining of the large intestine. These don't really look like nice pretty villi like you saw in the small intestine. In fact, these are kind of blunted off. That's because we're not doing food absorption or nutrient absorption here in the large intestine. The main job of the large intestine is actually water absorption. So we have completed the process of nutrient absorption in the small intestine. So that brings us to talking about the major jobs of your large intestine. The primary absorption that we're doing here is water absorption. Like I mentioned, no nutrient absorption here. The lining just isn't built to take in those nutrients. Bacteria, we actually make we make vitamins B and K here in the large intestine. Those bacteria actually help make those vitamins. And certain food groups have great sources of vitamins B and K. Let's talk about K, for instance. K is found in green leafy vegetables like kale and spinach. And so when you have those kinds of foods, your bacteria can manufacture and absorb the vitamins into the the large intestine lining. There's also other bacteria that lives in the large intestine, some harmful bacteria such as E. coli, but they should be kept in the confines of the large intestine by that ileocecal sphincter. So in some cases, if the ileocecal sphincter allows bacteria or feces to back up into the small intestine, then a serious infection may develop. So that's one really good reason to have a sphincter divide the line between small intestine and large intestine. Okay, so thinking back to vitamins, we just talked about those with the small intestine. Do you recall if either B or K is water soluble or fat soluble? Okay, so B is water soluble and K is fat soluble, which also means it can be stored. Obviously, the major job of the large intestine is also to produce feces, which are undigested food waste, mucus, bacteria, water, and other kinds of waste products like pigments from bile, which is why feces are brown in color, and epithelial cells that are shed off of the entire lining of the digestive tract. So let's talk more about defecation, because that's the process of producing a bowel movement and removing feces from the large intestine. So here's how defecation works. In terms of motility of the large intestine, there are small contractions that occur approximately every 30 minutes from one nostril to the next. Those are called haustral contractions. So alone, they are not going to be effective in pushing feces toward the rectum, and that's really what we need in order for a defecation reflex to occur. You also have mass movements that occur 3 to 4 times per day that typically coincide with meals or with taking in liquids, and these mass movements are waves of peristalsis that occur across the entire large intestine, and the goal here is to propel feces toward the rectum. So if things work out right and you've had enough food to eat per day, then there may be enough feces to propel toward the rectum so that we will have bowel movements around once a day or more. Having bowel movements once or more per day is unique to each individual. There's no normal for anyone. What's normal for one person may be abnormal for another. So when the rectum fills with feces, that's when a defecation reflex may set into play. That's a positive feedback mechanism that involves the urge to have a bowel movement. This, of course, involves the parasympathetic nervous system that allows for the relaxation of the anal sphincter to push out those feces. So normally that rectum is sitting empty. It shouldn't be filled with feces. If it is filled with feces, then you have the urge to have a bowel movement. All right, so we know that defecation reflexes often occur in conjunction with a mass movement. Mass movements occur in conjunction with eating a meal. So some people routinely have a bowel movement after a certain meal of the day, whether it's breakfast or dinner or maybe hot coffee in the morning. So a mass movement will help to initiate this reflex, because what we're looking for is the rectum to fill with feces. So you notice here that the presence of food in the stomach and the presence of chyme in the duodenum stimulates a mass movement. That's a mass wave of peristalsis that moves across the entire length of the large intestine. Once these feces fill the rectum, then we actually feel the urge to have a bowel movement. Let's talk about the anal sphincters for just a moment. There's an internal anal sphincter and there's an external anal sphincter. When we are having a bowel movement, the internal anal sphincter is made up of smooth muscle and it will relax. In this picture, this one here is the internal anal sphincter. I'll just put an I there for internal. So it will open when feces are being pushed into the rectum and the anus. The external anal sphincters are made up of skeletal muscle. We have to consciously control keeping that anal sphincter shut, because when we decide to have a bowel movement, we consciously open the external anal sphincters, and that of course opens up the anus and allows feces to exit. Now, early life, kids under age 2 oftentimes don't have good nervous system control and can't keep that anal sphincter shut. Likewise, later in life, people may have incontinence of the bowels, maybe due to stroke or other nervous system disorders, and again, it becomes difficult to keep that external anal sphincter shut. So it is the external one that we can consciously control since it's made of skeletal muscle. The internal one is the one that's made of smooth muscle that we do not have control over. Just a couple of interesting features here. You'll notice these columns, they call them columns of Morgagni. They're actually anal columns that allow for feces to be channeled out through the exit here of the anus. There's also folds up here called anal valves. I'll label one of these here. And if you're passing gas and not feces, these valves should, that's the operative word, right? They should prevent feces from traveling out of the anus at the same time as gas. So interesting stuff there. All right, so here you can see in this picture the splanchnic nerves are the ones involved in helping with a defecation reflex. So that process of defecation, of course, is parasympathetically controlled, and those splanchnic nerves actually tie back into, guess who? Vagus nerve. Just a few large intestine disorders down near the bottom of your page. Sometimes if people eat a diet that doesn't have a lot of fiber, or they strain really hard to have a bowel movement, then they can cause these little blowouts along the length of the large intestine called diverticulitis. That's actually when you have an inflammation of them. The condition of simply having the blowouts is called diverticulosis. Unfortunately, feces can get trapped in those little blowouts, and then infections can occur. That can be very painful to have inflammation and infection in those blowouts. You can see some of them here in the picture on the left. You can see an abnormal blowout here. Looks like one over here as well. And then on the right, those are not diamond rings. Those are in fact cross sections through the large intestine, and you can see feces trapped in those diverticulum. So foods that are hard, like peanuts and seeds, they can get stuck in those diverticulum and cause a lot of pain, especially if that area becomes inflamed or infected with bacterial infections. Another reason not to strain going to the bathroom is hemorrhoids. And hemorrhoids are basically valves with varicose veins with varicose, I can talk today, right? They are veins, varicose veins to be specific, and they have had their valves fail, so blood pools in these vessels, unfortunately, and can rupture. On your worksheet, there's also some note about diarrhea, which is, of course, watery stool. Constipation is lack of water in the stool. And then last on your worksheet, you've got a bit there about irritable bowel syndrome. A lot of good information coming out in research nowadays about IBS, but there's two main types. There's irritable bowel syndrome that goes with diarrhea and another that goes with constipation. All right, so that should complete page 91, and that should complete our information on the large intestine. The next video will pick up with the accessory organs of page 92.